I'm talking to myself. Good morning. Doesn't feel.
I heard somebody checking it before.
It doesn't seem like it. Can you? Does it
Yeah,
seem
it
like
does.
you can hear?
Yeah, I hear the
Okay.
echo or whatever you want to call it. Yes, too.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hello. We are going into the sanctuary now to begin the program. Everybody, if you could please leave your refreshments, and we're transferring into the sanctuary to begin the program. Thank you. We'll leave the food out, and you can afterwards, finish up then.
Don't clear my plate, I'll be right back.
I'm just going to make just an introduction.
Sure, of course. And the microphone's on?
Yes. You can just position it however, is good for you.
Okay, great.
All right? I'm going to hold on to this.
Sure.
And I'll sit here, and
Okay.
if someone knows.
Yeah, when they ask the questions, I'll go around and,
Unless you
Oh,
want
yeah.
to do that.
what?
Do you want to take the traveling, or would you
Sure.
rather?
You know, I might as well do it.
Okay, good. Now this is what you do, Max. Turn it on.
Right.
Hold it. Green light.
Dissemination for his program. Well, I gave it to everybody as they came in, but
You'll give it to me.
like,
Yes.
this came in.
I'll turn it on for you later.
Right, thank you.
I've seen you, but not formally.
Thank you.
Want to share it?
Yeah, I read it online, he hasn't read it.
Okay.
I think most people took one.
Okay. Yeah, I can give them out. I'll stand. As they keep. Okay. As they came in. Oh, okay. There may be. It's okay, I'm just trying to save you from extra work.
think I forgot my handout.
We need more light in here. I have one. I think we need more light. How do you get these on? Do you know?
Oh,
Maybe Bob knows.
either Bob or Stu.
Stu will know. Don't you think?
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah. Get Stu? I know, you need your glasses. Here.
Okay.
You just never sit there.
Here we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I am Brenda Tuller, and Maddie Kalb and I co-chair the Adult Education Committee. We want to thank you all for being here today in person or on live stream, supporting our adult education program. Today we are honored to welcome Max Kleinman, principal of Max Kleinman Consulting, which specializes in not-for-profit management, marketing, and resource development, and who is also president of the Fifth Commandment Foundation, which focuses on affordable housing for the elderly. Max serves as a consultant for the Jewish Community Legacy Project and chairs the Combating Anti-Semitism Initiative for Congregation Agudath Israel in Caldwell, New Jersey, for those of you who don't know where Caldwell is. He is a columnist for the New Jersey Jewish News, and for 2 decades, he was the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West and its Jewish Community Foundation. He was on the faculty of the Rutgers University School of Social Work and also taught at Yeshiva University. He has graduate degrees in history from City College of New York, where he was awarded the Cromwell Medal in History, Community Organization from Yeshiva University, and was a doctoral student in Modern Jewish and American History at SUNY Buffalo. A fellow at the Center for Social Innovation at Stanford University, he has certificates in executive coaching and strategic thinking from the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western University. He is co-author of Up Close and Personal and authored Maximum Potential. His numerous publications have appeared in Stanford Social Innovation Review, Nonprofit Quarterly, Journal for Nonprofit Management, and Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Whew. That's our program for today. Thank you for coming. No. Okay. Today, Max will present Israel, Lightning Rod for the New Anti-Semitism. He will be speaking about Israel and the rise of anti-Semitism, addressing the following concern. In the aftermath of the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, calls for the replacement of Israel by a greater Palestine have resonated, manifested by massive demonstration in European capitals and on college campuses. The new anti-Semitism has made supporters of Israel the new pariahs in progressive circles and beyond. What has changed to have created this new danger for Jews worldwide? What must Israel and American Jews do to confront this new evil reality? Well, I know we are all anxious to hear what Max has to say about all of this. You should have received a handout. You will have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the presentation, and then we will have extended wrap-up Q&A at the conclusion of Max's program. And now it gives me great pleasure to present Max Kleinman.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm going to speak with you afterwards because I want to hire you as my publicist. I also want to say hello to Eleanor Rubin, who invited me to join you last year when the most controversial issue we had to deal with was judicial reform. Remember that? And Eleanor and I go back decades. Eleanor was the past president of the Jewish Federation of Central New Jersey. She was an officer of the State Association. I remember having a retreat for board members in the Jersey Jewish News at your lovely home in Watchung, and now you're down here for about 11 years. So, Eleanor, it's always wonderful to see you. And I'm going to be discussing something about the war itself. What are some of the issues before I deal with the issue of the new anti-Semitism? So let me begin with an anecdote. There is this, can everybody hear me?
Not really.
No, it's a little sensitive.
Can you hear me?
That's a little better.
Okay. There was this atheist who was wandering in the forest, cavorting with nature. And in the distance, he saw a bear, a big bear, grizzly bear. And he was hoping that the bear wouldn't notice him. But unfortunately, the bear noticed him and started approaching him. And by the way, as you know, bears run very, very rapidly. So he starts moving as quickly as he can, and then he sees the bear chasing after him and catching up to him. Finally, out of desperation, the atheist.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask you to move a little bit closer.
How's that?
if you can.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Is that better?
Is there any way to increase the volume just a little?
I don't want to touch the iPad. I'm afraid I'll get my head chopped off.
I'll try to speak loudly. Can you hear me? Finally, in desperation, the atheist goes up, appeals to God, saying, look, all my life I didn't believe in you, but if you're able to save me, I will believe in you, I will be a faithful Jew, please. So all of a sudden, the bear stops in its tracks, and the atheist feels relieved. And then the bear started saying, oh Lord, Master of the universe, thank you for the food I'm about to eat. Just as a bear does not change its character, neither does a terrorist army like Hamas. So on October 7th, the day that will live in infamy, we witnessed the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. 1,200 souls were massacred, raped, and pillaged, equivalent to 45,000 Americans, and 236 were abducted, which is equivalent to 8,000 kidnappings when converted to American terms. Hamas was like the Einsatzgruppen of World War II, where German soldiers hunted Jews in the Ukraine and Russia and killed them. This was the Holocaust by bullets that preceded the gas chambers. But the Nazis tried to hide the evidence of these mass killings. Hamas celebrated them through video and other media. The savagery by Hamas was against defenseless men, women, and children, and is also reminiscent of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a radical Sunni sect. During World War II, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, al-Husseini, sided with Hitler, whom he embraced against the British and the Jews. And the Muslim Brotherhood assassinated Anwar el-Sadat after the Camp David Accords were recorded. Google the covenant of Hamas, and you will see that its goal is not only to eliminate Israel, but to kill Jews wherever they are. It's their mission statement. It's their raison d'etre. It's their constitution. That's why they exist in the first place. They are a radical Islamic sect like ISIS, and their goal is to create a Muslim caliphate in the Middle East. They are anti-liberal. They will murder gays. They degrade women, to put it mildly. And they hate everything that the West stands for, with our values of personal liberties. That's why it's so astounding when you see these so-called progressives at the college campus worshiping Hamas. So, why did this happen? Why did Hamas attack Israel? Well, with the economic and military benefits accruing from the Camp David Accords, from the Abraham Accords, with 4 countries making peace with Israel, there was momentum for an impending peace treaty with Saudi Arabia and Israel, brokered by the United States. The Saudis have been playing a double game. They were hedging their bets as they restored relations with Iran, which was brokered by the Chinese, and now they want to have a defense pact with the United States and also access to civilian nuclear power, and they will recognize Israel if Israel agrees to have a pathway towards an eventual state. So Hamas and its puppet master, Iran, wanted to quash this initiative and now succeeded for the time being. This, of course, was a colossal intelligence failure by the Israelis, but also by the West. The intelligence failure was a combination of complacency, misreading of Hamas as an organization, and over-reliance on technology and static defenses. Let's review some of the background of Gaza. Gaza was ruled by Egypt up until the Six-Day War, when Israel conquered Gaza. After the Camp David Accords, Israel offered Gaza back to Egypt, and Egypt rejected that offer. So after Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, unconditionally, with the expulsion of 9,000 settlers who made the desert bloom. I know they made the desert bloom because I was there 2 weeks before they were expelled, and I saw all the wonderful kibbutzim, the greenhouses, and the economic infrastructure that the Israelis had left for the Palestinians to take over. But alas, the Palestinian Authority took over, and subsequently elections were held, and Hamas won overwhelmingly. And they expelled, literally, the Palestinian Authority in a violent manner. And I've seen videos where leaders of the Palestinian Authority were thrown off 12-story buildings. So elections really are meaningless unless it's backed by a strong judiciary, separation of powers, a free press, and civil liberties. Hitler, after all, won a fair election in 1933, who then used the excuse of the Reichstag fire, which is probably caused by the Nazis, to seize total power. So that's Hamas in Gaza, seizing billions of dollars in international aid and from Iran over the years to build up its armies and use concrete ostensibly for hospitals and schools to build tunnels of hundreds of miles in the subterranean surface, beneath the surface of Gaza. Israelis thought they could manage this situation by periodically, quote, mowing the lawn, end quote, with incursions to nullify missile sites, and so forth. And various operations did impede Hamas's progress, but the Israelis never came up with a knockout blow because they did not want to engage in urban warfare. So Hamas was also seen as more moderate than they actually were by the Israelis and by the West. After all, Hamas did not participate in the spate of recent killings that occurred in the West Bank, led by the Lions Den and Islamic Jihad. And days before Hamas attacks of October 7th, over 20,000 Gazans went to Israel to seek employment and to get jobs. 20,000. Hamas was also viewed as a political resistance movement and part of the resistance politics defined by the Arab Spring. Richard Haas, the president emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations, viewed Hamas as like the Sinn Féin, which is a political arm of the Irish Republican Army. And Ephraim Halevi, who was a former head of Mossad, thought that we could negotiate with Hamas. So Khaled Mashal, a leader of Hamas, and other Hamas leaders were viewed as moderates and welcomed in capitals throughout the world, and they wined and dined in Doha, Qatar, to this very, very day. So Israel, considering this geopolitical stance, invested $1 billion in designing a security fence in Gaza with electronic sensors and cameras. Unfortunately, Hamas was able to neutralize the cameras and use cyber attacks to create the IDF to go blind. Too much of the focus of the Israelis was in the West Bank, and they were too complacent about Gaza. Robert Frost, the great poet, wrote, "Good fences make good neighbors." But fences alone, without a strong military presence, have been shown throughout history to be inadequate. The Israelis should have learned from the French and their over-reliance on the Maginot Line, which the Germans easily bypassed in 1940, and they should also have learned about the so-called invulnerable Bar-Lev Line of the Yom Kippur War. Hamas and Iran also perceived an erosion of deterrence by both Israel and the United States. As you know, from last year, Israel witnessed hundreds of thousands of individuals demonstrating against so-called judicial reforms, most of whom were against it. Many tens of thousands were in favor of it. And the controversy was so intense that some reservists and pilots publicly stated they refused to serve if called by the IDF. And then with our unilateral and humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan and tepid response to Iranian proxy attacks, there have been over 175 attacks on U.S. forces by Iranian proxy forces, either in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere. And our response has only been defensively, never anything on offense, which I think is a mistake. And most recently, we had a prisoner exchange with Iran. We exchanged 3 prisoners for 3 American prisoners, but we sweetened the pot by offering an additional $6 billion. And subsequently, we offered $10 billion to subsidize Iraqi electricity bills to Iran. That's $16 billion of payments towards Iran. And of course, unfortunately, we were not able to deter Russian aggression from invading Ukraine. So the Iranians and Hamas and the Houthis and Hezbollah sees that there really isn't a strong push on the side of the Americans in terms of deterrence, and also Israel was duped into believing that Hamas was more moderate than she actually was. So what must Israel do? Israel must destroy Hamas militarily to protect the motherland and restore her deterrence. Calls for a permanent ceasefire will only help Hamas rebuild and further degrade Israel's deterrence. Remember, Israel shoots missiles, the Iron Dome missiles, to defend civilians, both Jews and non-Jews, while Hamas shoots missiles to kill civilians and uses its own people as human shields. The largest hospital in Gaza, Al-Shifa Hospital, was housed a major command and control center for Hamas. And even the United Nations headquarters in Gaza served also as a command and control center for Hamas, and also was a staging point for their underground tunnels. So Israel must destroy Hamas as a military force. And that is very, very difficult, because urban warfare is the most difficult and most dangerous military action you can undertake. For comparison's sake, it took the United States Army and Iraqi forces 8 months to defeat ISIS in Mosul, which is a city of 2 million in Iraq, at the cost of 10,000 civilians killed and 5,000 ISIS combatants. That's a ratio of 2 to 1, civilians towards combatants killed. And they did not face any tunnels, nor did they face a situation of having over 100 hostages who were still hidden within the tunnels. Don't misunderstand me. Every civilian death is tragic. But the grim reality of war is that civilian casualties come with the territory. William Tecumseh Sherman, the very famous Civil War general, stated it well when he said that, quote, "War is hell," end quote. In Gaza, Israel vanquished over 15,000 Hamas terrorists against about an equivalent number of civilians. And in the cruel calculus of counting bodies, Israel's record is enviable, according to the West Point's expert at urban warfare, John Spencer. And Israel must simultaneously defend against Hezbollah attacks in the north, and another challenge is, of course, trying to rescue the hostages. So what must be done? Israel must prevail in eradicating Hamas in Rafah while protecting as many civilian lives as possible. The United States must exert pressure on Iran not to open a second front up in Lebanon. The days of appeasement are over. We must apply maximum economic pressure, apply full-throated sanctions against Iran, which is still exporting over 2 million barrels of oil a day. We must close Iran's access to the banking system, and we should no more provide any additional incentives for Iran to try to get into this illusory Iran nuclear deal. And any further attacks on U.S. troops must be met with overwhelming offensive force. Otherwise, the Iranian mullahs will fight until the last Arab proxy. We must support Iranian civil resistance for regime change. We must push the human rights card. We must continue to support Ukraine, which is part of an unfolding larger geopolitical equation with a new axis of evil, which includes Russia, it includes China, North Korea, and Iran. Meanwhile, back home, we Jews feel a sense of abandonment. The First Lady of Israel, Michal Herzog, expressed her sense of abandonment when none of the major international human rights organizations unequivocally condemned Hamas for its brutal slaughter and rape of Israeli women. Quote, "The silence of international human rights organizations and the unwillingness to believe Israeli women in the face of overwhelming evidence has been devastating," end quote, she wrote. It was only months later that these organizations acknowledged the massive rapes. And these are organizations that we thought were allies in protecting human rights and feminism. Jews, we Jews, have been disproportionately in the forefront of the social justice movement, combating racism in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, and fighting for gay rights, gender equality, abortion rights, and other aspects of the so-called progressive agenda. But our original sin as Jews is white privilege and our support for Israel. After all, Israel is an apartheid state settled by white colonizers. We are the casualties of intersectionality because the worldview of the ultra-progressives, the radical left, is binary. Either you're with us in all aspects of our ideology or you're against us. And support of Israel has become anathema. This zero-sum game, ironically, doesn't apply to Hamas or its fellow radical Islamists. Although in their ideal world, homosexuals are executed, women are treated as inferiors, and human life is seen as cannon fodder. I remember about 15 years ago when Ahmadinejad was president of Iran, he was invited to speak to students at Columbia University. And in his speech, a student sarcastically asked if there are any homosexuals in Iran, and he said, no. And everybody laughed, because everybody knows there are homosexuals in Iran. But what they didn't realize is if you're known to be a homosexual in Iran, you're executed. That's why he said there are no known homosexuals in Iran. So, how do we get to this point? As a response to the prejudice on display in the musical South Pacific, the lyricist Oscar Hammerstein wrote, quote, "You've got to be carefully taught," end quote. Hatred is not inborn. We're not born with hatred. It has to be cultivated. And now we are reaping the whirlwind of decades of indoctrination on the college campus. During the 1960s, and I was a student in the late 1960s on the college campus, the Marxist doctrine of the class struggle between capitalists and the proletariat was replaced by an emphasis on the struggle between the races. Frantz Fanon, a Marxist political theoretician, wrote his magnum opus, The Wretched of the Earth, at the height of the war between Algeria and France. He categorized the world as a struggle between the colonizers, the West and white people, and the colonized people of color. He called for decolonization, the violent removal of the colonizers. This fit in nicely with the anti-Vietnam War movement, which called for the withdrawal of American colonialists from Vietnam. While we recognize today, decades later, that our intervention in Vietnam in what was an unwinnable civil war was a disastrous mistake, the binary paradigm of race, white versus people of color, took hold among the students of the 1960s and 1970s. And those young people became the university faculty and administrators of today. Reinforced by critical race theory, which sees everything through the lens of race, and the DEI industry, diversity, equity, and inclusion, whose professionals are largely anti-Israel, according to a recent Heritage Foundation study, you see the ingredients of campus hostility against Jewish students who represent white oppression and the colonialist Jewish state. Too many of us have been deluded into thinking that we can assimilate our progressive agenda with our core values of support for a Jewish state, despite our view of any particularly Israeli government. So Tikkun Olam became our Torah to underpin our Jewish identity, while the ultra-progressives attacked us as white oppressors and supporters of a genocidal nation. We face a complex and generational challenge of differentiating between our genuine allies and counterfeit ones. We need to develop strategies that leverage our political, economic, legal, and philanthropic dollars to mitigate the rabid anti-Semitism confronting ourselves and our college students. But we cannot afford to be abandoned again. We must choose our friends wisely and get better at identifying our adversaries. So what should be done on our own shores? With campus moral rot on full display, with demonstrations supporting Hamas and calling for the destruction of the Jewish state and killing of Jews, political pressure should be exerted to downsize the DEI industry. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a large industry. In a survey of 65 leading universities, the average number of staff dealing with DEI is, how many do you think the average staff is on a college campus for DEI? Nationally, thousands. Each campus had over 45 students, professionals dealing with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Everything sounds great. Everything sounds kosher. Diversity, you want to have a diversified campus. You want to make sure that minorities are represented, those who are qualified, what have you. But when you take a look at this more deeply, you'll see that the so-called diversity in the college campus includes 90% of the faculty who voted Democratic and only 10% who were Republican. That's not diversity. Inclusion, I just mentioned before that Jewish students who identify with Israel are excluded from progressive circles, including DEI members of the staff who are overwhelmingly against Israel. And equity, equity sounds good. But equity is the opposite of equal opportunity in the eyes of the DEI industry. Equal opportunity means that we each have an equal way to advance ourselves. That's the dream of Martin Luther King. Judge us by our character, not by our race, was one of his famous dictums. But equity in the DEI industry means equal results. That means that merit doesn't really count as much because merit is seen as a white privilege. And without the meritocracy, we Jews and others, Asians and others, could never have advanced in American society. So there's really false labeling involved with DEI. So if DEI is downgraded, it will basically save universities administrative costs, reduce the bloated tuition increases of recent years, which have far exceeded inflation. What we should have instead of DEI is to have campus offices to make sure that there are no discrimination against minorities and making sure that the campus is hospitable to all people, whatever their race, color, or creed, which of course is not the case now on the college campus. Universities should also accept the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. IRA stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. That definition includes delegitimizing the Jewish state and its supporters. That means that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. If we Jews don't have the right to have our own Jewish state against the backdrop of 22 Arab states, that's anti-Semitic. You're judging us differently than any other group. So we should accept, a university should accept the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is supported by our own State Department in over 35 countries. And it can be used as a tool to prevent the harassment of Jewish students. Campuses should pursue real diversity by ensuring that diversity of opinion exists in the academy, mitigating ideological purity tests and groupthink, instead harnessing respect for differing viewpoints to ensure intellectual vitality. Uniformity of thought is anti-American, and now MIT is one of the first major universities to basically eliminate the need to write an essay on how you've advanced diversity, equity, inclusion for all faculty applying for jobs, even for those who are pursuing PhDs in biochemistry, physics, and so forth. And I think more and more of that will follow as the moral rot of the college campus is more fully exposed. As George Orwell wrote in 1984, quote unquote, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." The time has come to transform the DEI monster to comport with the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, irrespective of race, gender, religion, nationality, or affinity for the Jewish state. Meanwhile, more and more donors are responding by withholding donations until universities better protect their Jewish students and call out hatred. So you should contact your own university to expose any concern you may have about their hostility towards Jewish students and use your wallet as a tool. We should also call on politicians to publicly support Israel and to ask them to pressure the Department of Education to invoke Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to potentially withhold federal funds from schools that are inhospitable to Jewish students. For example, Columbia University gets over $1.2 billion in federal funds. And if they continue in their path of not allowing Jews to operate freely like any other group on the college campus, we should invoke Civil Rights Act of Title VI to jeopardize the continuation of accessing these federal funds. We should also cancel visas for foreign students calling for Israel's demise. As you know, in many of these demonstrations, many of those who were arrested were not college students. Some of them were not even citizens of the United States. They should have their visas revoked if they call for the destruction of a member of the United Nations. You should call your Israeli friends and relatives so that they know that they are not alone. You should write to the press if they are not covering what's happening in Israel appropriately. And believe me, the press has been doing a terrible, terrible job in terms of that, relying on the figures that Hamas gives for casualty figures, even though Hamas is in a position, first of all, to lie and cheat, and secondly, it's to their advantage to exaggerate the civilian deaths. And most of the press doesn't differentiate between those who were killed from civilians versus those who were killed who are Hamas terrorists. Have your children and grandchildren learn more about the history of Israel, warts and all, so when they go to the college campus, they're better prepared to answer questions that criticize Israel. And by the way, we just celebrated Jewish Heritage Month last month. Teach your children about the great contributions that American Jews have made to our society. Instill in them a sense of Jewish pride. Support Israel emergency campaigns by the United Jewish Appeal, Jewish National Fund, and other worthy organizations. Support Hillel on the college campus, which is the front line in combating this hatred against Jews. And also Jewish defense organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League, American Jewish Committee, CAMERA, which monitors the press for misinformation, as well as AIPAC. In conclusion, remember Israel lost 1% of our population during the War of Independence. That's equivalent to 3,350,000 Americans losing their lives, which is more than all the wars that Americans have engaged in over the years. We won the Yom Kippur War, suffering astounding losses after the surprise attack. But with our unity, support by the United States and other allies, and the might of the Israel Defense Forces and the resilient Israeli people, we will prevail. Am Yisrael Achai. Thank you. I am happy to answer any questions. And I'm going to use a roving mic. Or Brenda, you'll help me with that?
Okay.
Questions? I'll start.
Brenda, why don't you move around? Yeah, so he can stay.
But I was, okay.
You know, I'll just answer.
Oh, yeah, then you can respond. Okay.
I was trying to do my Donovan.
Hi, thank you. When Egypt controlled Gaza, what was the political status of Gaza within Egypt, and what kind of rights did the citizens there have or not have?
Gaza was part of Egypt since the since the end of World War I, as you know, the British and the French carved up the territory. As you know, the British and the French won World War I, and the British, conquered Israel and conquered some of the other territory from the Ottoman Empire. So a lot of these states were carved out, as what you see. And by the way, that's part of the problem about why we've had so many problems in Iraq, because they have Kurds there and who want their own independence and elsewhere. And Egypt included Gaza as part of its territory. Egypt, as you know, is an autocracy. They really don't have any civil liberties throughout their history, really. And now Al-Sisi, who's their president, is basically a military dictator. Fortunately, he's a friend of Israel. He basically overturned the control of Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood. For a period of about a year and a half or so, the president of Egypt was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. But he was jailed by Al-Sisi, and now, it's basically a military dictatorship. But they do work closely with Israel, and he has a good relationship with Israel. Certainly, as a military man, he's had a lot of contacts with the Israel Defense Forces over the years. So basically, Gaza was part of Egypt, which was an autocracy. And before, there was a so-called non-monarchist government. It was controlled by a monarchy. King Faisal, among others, who were very corrupt and overthrown by the Egyptians. Other questions?
Oh, sure. Be welcome. Eleanor?
My question is, why did Egypt not want Gaza? Why did Egypt not want to keep Gaza? It was part of Egypt.
Considering what's happened, well, first of all, it was conquered by the Israelis, because I guess they didn't want to have to deal with, basically. First of all, Egypt has a problem with feeding its people. Egypt has over 90 million people. Their economy is not very good, and they have a problem feeding their people. So after Gaza was conquered by the Israelis, they said, who needs us? Why do we have to deal with another 2 million people in probably the most crowded territory on earth? So they decided, probably wisely, not to take over Egypt again and let it be Israel's problem.
Can I ask another question?
Please, El, you can ask me any question you want.
Why was Israel not prepared for the October 7th attack?
As I mentioned earlier, Israel was duped by Hamas into thinking that it was a lot more moderate than it actually was. There were, about a year ago or 10 months ago or so, there was a spate of killings. I mean, dozens of Israelis were killed by these two groups in the West Bank, Lion's Den and Islamic Jihad. Islamic Jihad is controlled by Iran, too. But Hamas was not at all involved. Instead, they were concentrating on preparing for this October 7th attack. And as I stated earlier, 20,000 Gazans were working daily in Israel. So Israel thought that the situation in Gaza was under control, which obviously it wasn't. It was a terrible military intelligence failure. There were warnings about the fact that all these Hamas terrorists were rehearsing, they were doing all sorts of activities that eventually led to the October 7th attack, but they thought that it was basically for show and that it was not realistic. And again, they had an over-reliance on a defensive mentality where they thought that the offenses, the barriers would control, Hamas, which of course it didn't. So it's a combination of a lot of these different factors that led for Israel being unprepared for the October 7th attack. And once the war is over, there will be significant political consequences once it's uncovered about how this debacle happened, just as what happened after Pearl Harbor. There were a lot of signs about what was happening at Pearl Harbor, which for whatever reasons we did not take seriously. The same thing before 9/11. In the Kane report, commission report, it stated that there were enough signs about, people, the people who bought the airline tickets only bought airline tickets one way. And Tom Kane Sr. basically said it was a failure of our own imagination. And also the FBI and CIA did not communicate. So when you talk about military intelligence failures and debacles, you have a lot of different factors involved, and unfortunately, that's what happened on October 7th.
Just,
We're going to have to give us some participation on this side of the aisle, too, so.
just this one particular issue.
Can you
Over
hold the
the-
mic closer, Bob?
Over the years, can you hear me? Over the years, Jewish students have been very active at Columbia in all sorts of political ways, all sorts. And that's since they started getting into the place around the 1930s. Over the last 20 years or so, I am very unimpressed and angry at the Israeli government for tending to speak of anyone who criticizes Israel, they're anti-Semites. They're anti-Semites. Now we get to a point, maybe there are more anti-Semites. I'm sure people with a big mouth, when people with big mouths speak loud, everybody says, see, they're all anti-Semitic, or they're all anti-black. The fact is, I'm sure most of those people living in the tents had issues, and the word anti-Semitic wasn't part of the issue. But for one, when various organizations accuse other people of being anti-Semitic, I've heard it so many times over the last 30 plus years, that I don't believe any of them.
Okay.
We always say they're anti-Semitic.
Okay.
They're
Look,
not.
okay.
Let's say they're wrong,
Okay.
but they're not anti-Semitic.
I would encourage you, what is your name, sir?
Bob.
Bob. I would encourage you, Bob, to Google the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. In it, it states that criticism of the Israeli government is not anti-Semitic. But when you question the existence of the state of Israel, that crosses the line. I mean, look, we don't want to cry wolf. I mean, just like if you disagree with some person, they'll call you a racist, which is ridiculous because you're not, you're dealing with issues. We have to be very, very careful in accusing somebody of being anti-Semitic, because if you overuse it, it loses its power. Anti-Semitism is when you use common anti-Semitic tropes against Jews, when you delegitimize the state of Israel, the Jewish state, when you apply double standards to the Jewish state that's not applied to any other country. Those types of activities is anti-Semitic. The problem with
Too much crying wolf.
yeah, well, let's. Yes, I agree up until now, but but on the other hand, what has happened on this college campus with the encampments, clearly, in many cases, when they call for the elimination of the state of Israel from the river to the sea, international, apartheid, etc., when they call for an international jihad, that's killing Jews. That's eliminating the state of Israel. I'll mention a little story, and believe me, I will answer all your questions. I was the executive of the Federation in Greater Metro West for 20 years. And this is in the year 2002, shortly after 9/11, the 9/11 attacks. There was this columnist in the Daily Targum, which is the Rutgers daily newspaper, who wrote, "From the river to the sea," meaning from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, there should be a Palestinian state, which means that the state of Israel would not exist. It's a genocidal call. We put pressure on the president of Rutgers University, whose name was Fran Lawrence back then, to come out with a statement condemning this. So he came with a statement that stated that even if I were to disagree with his statement, he still has the right to say it because of academic freedom. So we were furious with the fact that even if I were to disagree with that statement, instead of saying I disagree with the statement, but he has the right to do it. So we set up a meeting with him after I spoke with major donors to Rutgers University, whom I knew because I didn't want them to be surprised. And I met with, you know Alvin Rockoff, the name Alvin Rockoff?
Yes.
Okay, I met with, Alvin Rockoff was the former chair of the Board of Trustees of Rutgers. So we set up a meeting with him, with Fran Lawrence, in Fran Lawrence's office. This is, again, in probably January 2022. And as we were waiting in the office, I happened to pick up a copy of the Wall Street Journal, and in it was an op-ed about what happened at the University of Texas, where a professor of physics stated that 9/11 was America's fault. And the president of the University of Texas says, that gentleman has every right to say whatever he believes is part of academic freedom, and I have the right to call him an idiot. And when we showed that column to Fran Lawrence, all of a sudden his backbone stiffened and he came with the right statement. So the point I'm making is, yes, we should not accuse people of being anti-Semitic if they criticize the Israeli government. But when they call for the elimination of the State of Israel, which in effect is a genocidal call for the elimination of 7 million Jews, and by the way, 3 million Israeli Arabs, then that crosses the line into anti-Semitism. Other questions? Let's go on this side, because I don't want anybody to be accused of my aligning with this side against that side.
Hi. Similar to what Bob said, actually, I'm listening to everything that you say, and I'm feeling caught because I do stand and believe in Israel as a state, but I don't agree with the statements about DEI and CRT on college campuses. I know a lot of professionals who are highly educated, who are doing great work to help facilitate dialogue between groups that don't agree. So I think part of what I'm struggling with is we're trying to educate people about who Jews are and what anti-Semitism is, and we're putting people who are uneducated on the defensive if they automatically, when they hear things like some of the things that you're saying. So the history makes a ton of sense, I get it, but I guess part of it is the role of our professionals, of our college folks needs to be, we're going to allow protests, and in order to protest, you have to participate in a dialogue with this other group that is facilitated, that enables a discussion about where these folks are coming from, because none of this is going to get solved if we're making the other bad. And so part of me, and I don't know what that looks like, except in that one example, but I am looking at my friends who are staunchly pro-Israel, who have children who are struggling on campus because they've been raised as proud Jews, but they don't like what they are seeing is happening in Gaza and don't know how to talk about the death and the destruction and what is seemingly to be this underdog community. So that's part of it, is that the world, we are making this such a binary issue, and it's really not. Anti-Semitism is wrong. And death of all of these people is wrong. So how do we get people to be able to talk to each other instead of against each other? Because I guess part of it is a lot of the people that I know that maybe sit where I sit, that don't feel as empowered to say that they are uncomfortable with the rhetoric on both sides, they're not sitting in this room because they don't feel welcome. So that's just my sharing, and I hope you have something, like a response maybe.
I mentioned before, thank you. I mentioned before that we have to make sure that our youth are educated about Israel, about what the facts are, warts and all. Israel shouldn't be viewed as, this olam haba, this world to come. Israel has its imperfections, but despite 76 years of existence, it's still a viable democracy, facing hostile neighbors throughout its whole existence. I mean, I remember, and as you know, I'm a student of history. During World War II, the United States homeland was never attacked. Pearl Harbor was attacked, but Pearl Harbor was not part of the American homeland. It wasn't a state. Hawaii became a state in 1959. Yet we incarcerated over 100,000 Japanese Americans in California and other western states because we were, but most of whom were citizens, because we were afraid that they were going to engage in sabotage, what have you, et cetera. And by the way, the one who initiated who initiated this action against the Japanese Americans was the Attorney General of California. His name was Earl Warren, the famous Supreme Court justice who presided over Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. So that's our own history. Our homeland was never attacked. Anybody see the movie 1941 by Steven Spielberg? It deals with the hysteria that happened on the West Coast, okay? So there hasn't been any massive incarcerations of Israeli Arabs, during it. So we should take great pride in the fact that Israel has been able to maintain its democracy. And don't forget that 20% of Israel's population are Arabs, and they're entitled to all the freedoms that Jews are entitled to, etc. Now look, every government can be criticized, just as every government that we have in the United States can be criticized. I mean, if we criticize our current administration, we're not anti-American. But when it crosses the line, as I stated earlier, to delegitimizing Israel, then it becomes anti-Semitic. So the first thing we have to do is to educate our young and educate their contemporaries, what have you. Secondly, we have to call the media to task. Right now, there are millions and millions of Sudanese who are suffering starvation. Millions. Is that anywhere in the press? I remember when I led a group of students to Israel when I was on the faculty at Rutgers. Most of the students were not Jewish. And they were concerned, before we left, they were concerned about violence in Israel, this, that, and the other. And I said, Israel's very, very safe. We're going to take every security measure you can take. And then when we were coming into Jerusalem, there were 3 individuals who were killed at a terrorist attack. And it was all over the media, CNN, everywhere else. And then, when I spoke to the students in their reaction, I said, Israel is magnified to the greatest degree compared to any other country in the world. There were more homicides that occurred in Chicago than in Israel. And do you ever hear about it? So the media is so obsessed with covering Israel. And also, as I said, they get fed the propaganda. Of course, you see the film, when civilians are killed and all of that stuff. And I think that people have to recognize that this is what happens in a war when Hamas uses civilians as human shields and when they use underground tunnels to hide themselves from attacks. So, it's difficult to explain something against the images you see on the television set, but people have to, be educated to be fair in terms of what the Israelis are facing, and that they don't intentionally try to kill civilians, whereas with Hamas, their strategy is a win-win strategy. Kill Israelis, that's good. Kill Palestinians, that's good too, because it's blasted in the media. Israel is facing a very, very difficult situation. But as I stated earlier, they have no alternative. They have to defeat Hamas militarily. Now, don't misunderstand me. I know that Hamas will still exist ideologically. ISIS still exists ideologically. Al-Qaeda still exists ideologically. But they don't have the military capacity to attack Israel the way they did October 7th. That's what Israel has to prevent, and also preventing Hamas from governing Gaza again. You had your hand up a lot.
It's okay.
I'm working my way down, so we'll go here and then marching.
I don't mean to scapegoat anybody here, but I do see a correlation with the rise of the likes of Bernie Sanders. I never heard of, I don't even know who George Soros is, but I hear about it.
George Soros.
Yeah, I was just wondering if, I'm a little nervous, if the rise of these people have created our young to be so influenced, whether it's their economic messaging, but I just wonder if they contributed to the rise of these college students having such strong emotions against Israel.
Okay, when you talk about the top 65 universities, in many cases, it's almost like an echo chamber. I mean, look, most students go on their business, they want to get their degrees, and most Jewish students say, look, this is terrible, but I want to get the degree. The problem is that if they go into classes on the Middle East and elsewhere, if they don't subscribe to the anti-Israeli viewpoints of the professor, they're afraid that they're not going to get good grades, they're not going to get recommendations. They're really caught in a very, very difficult situation. But it's an echo chamber based upon the fact that, as I stated earlier, many of the faculty have grown up with this neo-Marxist prism of white privilege against people of color. I mean, how do you have queers for Gaza marching when if they were found to be homosexual in Gaza, they'd be executed by Hamas? Why? The reason is because they're people of color. You know, us whites can do no right, and people of color, in their view, can do no wrong. I mean, that's why there's no reaction to Sudan, where you have whites, and by the way, there's continued recurrence of genocide in Darfur, which occurred, 20 years ago. So you have this neo-Marxist ideology ingrained in a lot of these students by their faculty and by their administrators. I'll give you another example. Harvard University has certain student codes, and you could violate the student code if you use the wrong pronoun. Did you know that? If you use the wrong pronoun. Yet the president of Harvard could not say unequivocally that if you call for the genocide of students, it's against the student code of Harvard. I mean, that's the type of insanity that it's reached. I think that we reached a point where there's going to be a counter-reaction. There are numerous lawsuits that are going on. These congressional hearings have pointed out the moral rot. People are going to be aggressive about invoking the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and the United States government gives billions and billions of dollars to universities for research grants, student loan support, things of that nature. And I think the writing's going to be on the wall where, if only they're going to be concerned about their pocketbooks, that there's going to be a significant change, within that realm. And also, more and more universities are eliminating the DEI bureaucracy, which feeds fuel into this anti-Western animus. And by the way, a lot of this, when you talk about anti-Israel, it's anti-West. It's not just anti-Israel. It's anti-the United States. You saw American flags being burned, what have you. This is an attack on Western civilization in terms of our own personal liberties, and capitalism, things of that nature. Don't be misled to think that it's only anti-Israel.
And that's why I bring up, like, Bernie Sanders. 'Cause he just
Well, Bernie Sanders is a self-hating Jew, to be frank. George Soros has funded many of these ultra-liberal initiatives, including a lot of these DAs who basically release individuals from jail, without bond or what have you. I think there's going to be a counter-reaction. If you remember during the George Floyd riots, people were saying defund the police, defunded the police. And even at the Democratic National Convention of that year of 2020, nobody ever defended, the police because it was not politically correct. And now you see that the mayor of San Francisco, which is probably the most liberal city in the country, is asking for significant increases in their police budget. To every action, there's a counter-reaction. And I think that there's going to be a counter-reaction, particularly with the slew of litigation, invoking Title VI, donors withholding their funds, investigations into how much money Arab countries are pumping into universities, like Qatar has pumped in billions of dollars into some of these universities in the Middle Eastern departments, which ipso facto are anti-Israel. I think there's going to be a counter-revolution, a counter-reaction in that regard.
Hi.
Yes, hi.
Two things. To just kind of bounce off of that, I think it's kind of stating the obvious, but social media has fed into
Yes.
a lot of this mistrust, misinformation, the shiny object in the room. And for the young people, I have daughters who are adults. They don't get their news from cable. They don't even own cable. So they're getting their news, a lot of their news from social media and what's being fed to them. And of course, their parents feed them articles that they think they should read. So I think it's time for our generation and older to realize that this young generation that's coming up through the ranks is not getting their information the way that we got it with Walter Cronkite back in the day. So that's one thing. And then my question about half hour ago, you had talked about Hamas, and you know, a lot of people are saying, well, Hamas was elected. They elected them. Why did they elect them? What did they promise their people that got them elected in the first place?
Okay, I agree with you about social media, and I think it's toxic. And I'm happy that there's been a bill passed that will require TikTok to be sold to an American company rather than being controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And you're right, so many of them get the news from there, and there are more and more schools are banning iPhones or the Google equivalent from the classrooms because, first of all, it's distracting. Secondly, by the way, I'm worried about the next generation because you know, they interact through the phone. They don't have face-to-face contacts, and I'm worried about that. I remember about this quote about saying, oh, the next generation, they're so self-indulgent. They don't have the values that the current generation has. You know who the author of that statement was? Socrates. Socrates. So it's always the older generation bemoaning the plight of the next generation. So this is, you know, nothing new. What was the second point you were making?
How Hamas got elected.
Okay. The Palestinian Authority, which took over Gaza, is incredibly corrupt, and they mismanage terribly. So in one sense, you know, they did not view the Palestinian Authority as being the right group to be able to govern. So in 2005, 2006, when they had that election, that's why Hamas won, by and large. But the situation is much worse today because the majority of the Gazans support the October 7th attack. And that makes for a very, very difficult, you know, situation. And this whole notion about, you know, a pathway for a Palestinian state, who's going to control the Palestinian state, which entity is going to do that. It can't be the Palestinian Authority as presently constituted. And I think that the big question becomes which group of leaders who are not Hamas lovers and who are not corrupt, who support the existence of a Jewish state, which in that group will be able to govern Gaza and not get assassinated. I mean, that is the critical question that exists. And right now, considering what happened on October 7th and everything else that's going on, only 19% of Israelis support a Palestinian state. Only 19%. So the Israeli body politic, which has really suffered tremendously during these months, are afraid that if there were ever a Palestinian state, it would be overrun by a Hamas-like group. And when you are within rifle distance of Ben Gurion Airport, you can literally close down Israeli commerce. So that's the problem that we're facing. Yes, sir.
Am I the sir?
Yes. I'll refer to her as madam.
Well, yeah. I can't see behind me. I came today, basically I was interested in your position on these things. Most Jews that I know, it's a black and white situation. The good guys are the Israelis, that's white, and there's the other side, and they're all
Who's
wrong.
the other side? Hamas? Who's the other side?
No, not Hamas. Hamas is the extreme.
So who's the other side?
Can I talk?
Sure.
Or are you going to keep interrupting
Go ahead.
me? Hamas is the extreme of the other side. They wouldn't have the support of others if there weren't grievances. You spoke so quickly, and I understand you had a lot to say in a short time that it's hard to respond to everything. One thing, well, let me start. You talked about the American reaction after Pearl Harbor. That was a disgrace. And to use that as an example, I think is a poor example. It's one of the disgraces of American history. There was an exhibit up at Hyde Park a couple of years ago, where Roosevelt's birthplace on Pearl Harbor. And as badly as I thought we treated the Japanese Americans at that time, it was a lot worse. I don't think, I can agree with you that Arabs have equal rights in Israel. If they had equal rights, I don't think there'd be the protest movements that you're talking about. And I haven't heard anything from the Israeli government or any pursuit in recent decades of a two-state solution. I remember Abba Eban. Some of us are old enough to remember Abba Eban made the remark that we'll meet with anyone anywhere at any time to work out an agreement. Well, after the Yom Kippur War, I think that I haven't seen the Israeli government following that. A good friend of mine,
Could you get,
a good friend of
could you
mine.
ask the question, because, you
All
know,
right.
we want questions
All right,
rather
I'll-
than
I'll-
speeches,
I'll-
okay?
I'll just
And I'm
mention-
happy to respond to every point you
I'll
make.
mention one other thing.
Go ahead.
A friend of mine used to say that for Israel to say that everybody dislikes us, everyone is anti-Semitic, so we don't have to pay attention to their criticisms, becomes, after a while, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And would you agree with that, or you disagree with that?
I agree with the fact that criticism of the Israeli government is legitimate, and it is part of the democratic equation. Every citizen has the right to criticize the state of Israel, and everybody who's outside, Israel has the right to criticize the Israeli government for the faults that they make. You mentioned about Abba Eban. Abba Eban also said that the Palestinians never lose an opportunity to lose an opportunity. There have been 3 to 4 examples of when a Palestinian state was offered to the Palestinians, all of which were rejected. I'm not going to go rhyme and verse into what they were, but even the original resolution of the United Nations that was offered in 1947 included a Jewish state and an Arab state, and the Arab armies attacked Israel. And most recently, Ehud Olmert offered an incredibly generous offer for the Palestinians, which was rejected. We all know about the Oslo Accords and that process. So there have been many, many initiatives on the part of the Israelis to offer a Palestinian state was offered. And it's been the Palestinians who have rejected it. And now, as I stated earlier, with what happened after October 7th, it's understandable why a great majority of Israelis don't want to have a Palestinian state, because they saw what happened to Gaza. Gaza was a Palestinian state. Israel withdrew unilaterally and unconditionally, and that was a Palestinian state, and look what happened. So anyway, but I agree with you, the fact that criticism of Israeli government is perfectly okay, and in many cases laudable, because they've made their share of mistakes like any other country. And by the way, just as the United States has not reached perfection in terms of how we deal with minorities and elsewhere, Israel's not perfect either, and I'm sure there's a lot of discrimination against Israeli Arabs, as there were against Mizrahi Jews in the early decades of the state. How you judge a democracy is how do you learn from your mistakes, and how do you improve, to move forward on that. You had a question, Matt? Matt?
Okay. Yeah, there are just so many things as we've talked. I actually thought that the statement of the river to the sea originally came from Israel and was co-opted. That it's originally in the, I'm going to say sort of the mission, but leave that aside for a moment. I grew up in and went to college and
Where?
say early.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Spring Valley, New York.
Oh, Spring Valley,
Yeah.
okay.
Anyway, so when I went in the 70s, I was part of the protest movement. I believe in protests. That was against the Vietnam War. I think students have
I
the
went
right.
to the student mobilization against Vietnam in
Protest.
1969.
By the time, and Israel was the cause célèbre of the liberal movement, of the liberals. By the time my daughter went in the early 2000s, it was completely flipped. So this is the pro-Palestinian movements have been going on for a long time, because by the time my daughter went to college. She was definitely on her back heels over the views, about the treatment of the Palestinians by Israel. And, and so I think this was their moment when Hamas seized the moment and has made the use of it to really, but I also think that I don't agree with the statement that Israel had no idea that Hamas, Qatar was feeding money. I don't understand.
I didn't say that. I said that Israel ignored some of the warnings that Hamas
Right.
was up to.
So the question part is, I heard a lot about the problems of the, if you will, the woke left, nothing about the problems of the ultra-Orthodox right and the settlements and the treatment of Arabs, in feeding, I think, some of the, I'm going to call it anti-Semitism or even anti-Israel kind of, the lack of support and the treatment that has gone on of Arabs over all the years of Israel's statehood that are part of the underpinning of the Palestinian movement. Okay, so
Well, listen, I think that a lot of Israelis are concerned about this radical right-wing government that is governing Israel now. And I think that once the war is over or nearing an end, there's going to be a call. Benny Gantz now has been calling for new elections, and I think that the Netanyahu government will be overwhelmingly voted out of office, together with his right-wing cohorts. In terms of the ultra-Orthodox, let me give a little bit of historical background. When David Ben-Gurion was in the process of trying to found the State of Israel, he wanted to have all segments of the Israeli public to be supportive of the State of Israel. So he was negotiating with the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate, and in order to get them aboard, he gave assurances to them that the status quo in terms of religious law, whether there's public transportation on Shabbat or not. So in Haifa, you had public transportation allowed, but in Jerusalem and others, you didn't. So he pledged that the status quo would be maintained, and that the idea that any of their students who were studying Torah in the yeshivot would be exempt from the military army. That was in 1948. We were talking here about 400 yeshiva students, okay? Today, you have 60,000 yeshiva students annually who are studying in yeshivot who are exempt from military service. The Supreme Court, by the way, the Supreme Court in many, many cases have sided with Israeli Arabs against the Israeli government. I mean, they are a major bulwark, against overreach by the government, just like our own, Supreme Court is too. So in any event, the point I was making is that there is now, the Supreme Court basically said that it's discriminatory to exempt the ultra-Orthodox from the military. So now there's legislation going on and back and forth about to what extent can they pass legislation that will be acceptable to the Supreme Court and also not dismantle Netanyahu's government, because his government has a disproportionate number of seats from the ultra-Orthodox parties. Meanwhile, Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, want to have even more numbers rather than less. It's become a political battle. But at the end of the day, something's going to have to happen in terms of getting the ultra-Orthodox to really step up to the plate in terms of participating in the defense of Israel.
One final question.
Yes. It's me up here. I just read this morning that two of the right-wing ministers are threatening to leave the Netanyahu government if Netanyahu accepts the Biden peace plan. My question is, if they do leave, would Benny Gantz and Lapid come in with Netanyahu to form a coalition government? I thought you could comment on this.
It's too early to tell. I know that Yair Lapid will give Netanyahu political cover. In other words, have his party support the government so that it wouldn't fall if that happened. But I am very, very worried about this potential chasm between Biden administration and Netanyahu. Well, let me explain why. First of all, this is a so-called Israeli proposal, not an American proposal. But it's a question of how you interpret the proposal. There are 3 different phases in it, and the critical question becomes, what constitutes, what do you need in order to have a permanent ceasefire? A permanent ceasefire means the end of the war. And the president has stated that, Hamas is now militarily degraded. They cannot attack, October 7th again. But there are 4 battalions in Rafah. You're talking here about 8,000 to 10,000 Hamas militants. So Netanyahu is saying they have to be defeated militarily. You just can't have them, have enough of a critical mass militarily in order to seize power again in Hamas and Gaza, and then start October 7th all over again. So there's going to be a lot of tension between how you view how you view what constitutes, what you need to have happen with a permanent ceasefire. And I worry that there's going to be a lot of disagreement, having fuel on top of the fire. That's what I'm worried about. We'll see what happens. Hopefully, there's enough people on both sides who are negotiating and navigating this so this doesn't turn into a crisis. But, I'm concerned. What's that joke? What's that joke about what constitutes what constitutes concern for Jews? It's a telegram that says "Start worrying." So I'm a little concerned about that. But we'll only the unfolding hours and days will we get the answer to that question.
Do you think Blinken is doing a good job?
Excuse me?
Blinken.
I think in many, many ways he's doing a good job. But in other ways, Blinken is the Secretary of State fulfilling the policy of the United States government. I think that using Ukraine as an example, I think that we've had more of a defensive orientation with Ukraine, and to not allow, up until a couple of days ago, for Ukraine to attack Russian bases where the Russian military is, that it's attacking Kharkiv. Because basically what's happening is they know that the Ukrainians can't fire against them in the Russian territory because they can't use U.S. munitions for that. So what do you think they are? They're going to go across the Russian territory. So now, most recently, days ago, this has been a policy since the beginning of the war. And we haven't given F-16s to the Ukrainians, enough offensive, and now they've suffered significant, reductions in force. And of course, I blame the Republicans for holding up aid to Ukraine, so it's taken so much time. And hopefully it's not too late. So I'm happy that we changed our policy, in that regard. I think the Afghanistan withdrawal was a complete debacle and disaster, leading to the loss of lives of 13 of our own soldiers, but also hundreds of others. And I remember in the days after, the U.S. government wrongly identified a family who they thought was the one who caused the disaster, killing the 13 Marines, and the whole entire family was wiped out by this mistake. It was a military mistake. So, yes, in many, many ways, I think he's doing a very, very good job. The fact if we're able to get Saudi Arabia into a posture where they normalize relations with Israel and some kind of nebulous language about, a path towards a Palestinian state can be negotiated, that would be an unbelievable game changer. So it's yet to be seen, but I think that he's done some very good things. Certainly the guy is very prodigious. I think he's a great supporter of Israel. His own family includes Holocaust survivors. So I think in that respect he's done a reasonably good job, but as I stated earlier, I'm free to criticize the policy of our government just as anybody else is free to criticize the actions of the Israeli government.
I want to thank Max for an outstanding, very informative program. Gave us a lot of lively discussion. We all have our different viewpoints, but look how nice we all shared our different perspectives, and nobody is fighting yet. I don't know what you're going to do out in the parking lot, but control it. But anyway, a lot of food for thought. It's a complex issue, which we certainly can't solve. I'd like to also thank Cantor Clissold, who set up our live stream link, Magda Reyes, who has provided ongoing educational and technological support, Sheila Sachs for handling our RSVP registration, Jordana Steinberg and Jackie Brustein for helping with publicity production. And there are several of our committee members who are here today. And you see, I'm doing all these thank yous because this is our final program of the year. So we have to acknowledge all those people who really gave us support and help. So when I call your name, could you please stand? Susan and Bob St. Leifer. Stand up. Margie Wald. Eleanor Rubin. And if it wasn't for Eleanor's, I just have to say that it's because of Eleanor's special friendship with Max that we were able to secure him as our speaker today. So thank you, Eleanor. And for the banana bread and the coffee cakes from Susan. Also, I would like to especially thank Rabbi Edelman, who has been a wonderful, uplifting, and guiding force to our committee the whole year. And to you, what would we do without our audience? The people who come and attend our programs, it means so, so very much to us, whether in person or if you're still hooked up to live stream, thank you for being there. Or if you've come to a program via Zoom during the year as well. We really, really appreciate it. And anyone who has made a donation to our bowl, we very, very much, we are so grateful because our budget is a little restricted this year and all those funds mean a lot to us. And following up on that thought, if you have a yurt site that you would like to remember or a special occasion, we welcome a donation to honor that to the Adult Ed Fund. So thank you for considering that. I'm almost done, okay? Over the summer, Maddie Cow, my co-chair, where has she? I was going to ask her to stand up, but I don't know. Well, anyway, we're working on developing a flyer like we had last year that will showcase all the events for the upcoming year, 2024-25. We've already secured many wonderful programs, so I hope that the flyer will be completed by September, and then you'll see what's going on in MRT, not just from our committee, but there's some other wonderful educational opportunities that will be provided by the rabbi and Magda, and you'll be able to read about that. And also Zach Elstein, who has a tour study program every Saturday. And in line of that, I'm almost done here. And, oh yes, I just hope that we will see you at many of these programs. Continue coming out. We love you all, and you mean so very much to us. Thank you, and have a great summer.
I don't know if you realize that this was Maddie and Brenda's first year as leading the Adult Ed Committee, and you've done a fabulous job. I'm sure.
Why are you hiding back there? Okay, thank you. Mwah.
Brenda, thank you.
Oh, nice. What a